let's turn in our Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 58. This will kind of be our anchor verse for the next few weeks as we study this topic here. So 1 Corinthians 15, verse 58. You can read in your Bibles on your phone or on the screen here on my left and right. It says this, "Therefore, my beloved, be steadfast, immovable, always excelling in the work of the Lord, because you know that in the Lord your labor is not in vain." I'm going to read that again. "Therefore, my beloved, be steadfast, immovable, always excelling in the work of the Lord, because you know that in the Lord your labor is not in vain." When we think of something that's immovable, we think of large, massive objects. We think of mountains. We think of large bodies of water like the ocean. Or for some of those in New York, you think of a giant herd of Pokemon Go players that invaded Central Park and stopped traffic everywhere. How many of you have seen this before? Have you seen those people now walking the street? Head on the phone? Yeah, they're playing Pokemon Go right now. We think of these massive, immovable objects. Now, the definition of immovable is quite simple. It's something that's not able to be moved. It's pretty straightforward definition. And we're trained to identify these objects. When you're in driving school, you're trained to look out for things that are stopped in the middle of the road so you can swerve around them. When you're walking, you're trained to look in front of you. At least most of us are. Some of us just, hit the wall right in front of us. Sometimes any of those walking impaired, you feel me? Or visually impaired, when you start walking, you just lose sight, pay attention. We are trained to walk around objects that will impede our progress. And when I was searching this term, I was actually quite surprised. One of the most searched phrases was what was called the immovable ladder. And I was really surprised when I found this. But in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in central Jerusalem, we see that little ladder right there. That ladder has stayed in that place for over 250 years. And it's called the immovable ladder, not because it's anchored in place, but in order to move it, 6 different church councils have to agree before anything is moved in that church. See, there are certain things that we deem immovable that are actually quite meaningless. There are certain things that we've called immovable or fixed, or situations in our life that we've tried to change. And after time and time again, we eventually give up and say, well, that thing ain't moving, that thing ain't changing. But the Bible has a different perspective on what is truly immovable. The Bible has a different framework, and this place of faith that we're called to operate from is different than how many of us live from. And Jesus changed the perspective of everyone and changed their trajectory of belief. In Matthew 17, he said this in verse 20, "For truly I tell you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you'll say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move." That's some serious faith. See, in a biblical perspective, Jesus says nothing will be impossible for you. We're actually supposed to look out in front of us and say that nothing can hinder the progress that the Lord desires to have. Nothing can hinder the progress or movement forward that He's called us to walk in. And what we learn is this, that God uses what appears to be immovable in front of us to do an immovable work within us. What appears to be immovable in front of us, He identifies the object and says, I'm going to do a work in you that's in front of you will not impede the progress that I've designed. Again, 1 Corinthians 15:58. Think about the context of the passage. When Paul's writing to this Corinthian church that honestly is an incredibly dysfunctional church. How many have been a part of dysfunctional churches or a part of one right now? Just kidding. But we've all been in these really dysfunctional places. Corinthian church was a very dysfunctional church. And as he's there, he's actually writing about how Jesus conquered death. Death's pretty immovable. All of us are going to confront it one day, unless if Jesus comes back sooner. And as he's writing how Jesus conquered death, his closing remarks of that chapter is, in light of that, be steadfast, be immovable, excelling in the work of the Lord. We can't let anything stop the progress that God has. He wants us constantly moving forward in Him. Now, if we're not moving with Him, we probably won't move forward. We can't be hoping that these things in front of us will continue to move forward if God's not in what we're trying to move forward in. But we're called to excel in the work of the Lord, and it starts from an internal state that we will not be shaken no matter what we see in front of us. Now, our culture values what we have and what we do. You are often defined in our culture by what we have or what we do. But in the biblical framework, our value is defined by who God says we are. And this concept of immovability or being steadfast or unshaken is something that happens beneath the surface. We can't see it. And we often underestimate its value. Matt White was a minor league baseball pitcher for the Dodgers. All the Giants fans are cringing right now. When you show that hat, they're like, no, get away, right? But he was a minor league pitcher for the Dodgers, and he got his minor league contract. And it wasn't this massive, lucrative contract. I guarantee it was more than a lot of us make here. But it was a decent amount of money, but it wasn't a massive major league deal. And as he gets this contract, the first thing that happens is family members start calling him. That's kind of what happens, right? So the family members start calling him, and he gets a call from a relative that says, can you help out your aunt? Your aunt is needing to go to an elder care facility. She doesn't have the money for it. All she has is her house. Can you buy her house from her? It was this really old house on a larger piece of property. And he said, well, how much are you needing to sell it for? $50,000. So out of the kindness of his heart, he buys this house, and it's broken down, it's beat up. So when he buys the house, they start doing remodel and repair, and it's about to tear the house down. They start doing excavation work, and they hit rock beneath the house. And they were really surprised. And as they bring out this excavator, then they bring out this geologist, and they start doing a survey of the land. They said, there's something we've come across. And he said, well, what's that? He says, right now, this house is sitting underneath a large amount of quartz and a large amount of rock, and it actually expands to the whole property. And the estimated value of the rock beneath the surface is $2 billion. It's a good little day. I'll take that investment in a second. On the surface, that property had no value. But its value was beneath the surface, what I could not see. The value that God is doing in you is not often what can be seen around you. It's what's taking place inside of you. We can't underestimate what God is doing within us. We have to start living for the age ahead, not the age we're in now. And this is this concept. What does it mean to be immovable? What are those rocks that God's putting in our heart that trust the faith, the promises, his character? Because those are the things we're pursuing as we excel and move forward in the work of God. This morning, we're going to study the story of Israel as they were at a massive crossroads. They needed God to do something significant and how they saw God show up, but it was more about the work that he was doing in them rather than what he was doing in front of them. So let's turn to Joshua chapter 1, verse 1. We're going to go quickly through this story. Kind of do an abbreviated version today, but hopefully grab some deep concepts here as God's speaking. Joshua 1, verse 1. You can read in your Bibles or read with us on the screen here. It says this: after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, my servant Moses is dead. Wow, what encouraging words, God. Now proceed to cross the Jordan, you and all his people, into the land that I'm giving to them, to the Israelites. So here's Joshua. He has this massive amount of people. The tribe of Israel is with him, and Moses has died. Now, Moses was the man of the hour. When you look at one of the most dominant biblical figures, Moses often rises up to the top. And Moses had one of those miraculous stories. There was a genocide taking place. He was spared. He's put in this basket. He's floated down a river. And then sure enough, one of the princesses of Egypt find the basket. He's taken into royal care. Now, Moses grows up as this prince in Egypt. He has an anger problem, ends up killing a man, flees from there. Now he's hanging out in this desertous area, herding sheep, and then God shows up to him in this flaming bush. That's a pretty amazing encounter. That's a great quiet time. How many would sign up for that quiet time? Oh, there's the Lord speaking to me. God then is there, does these miracles in his midst, right in that little quiet time he has. From there, he goes and grabs his, one of his, Aaron, I think his brother-in-law there, grabs Aaron. As they're there, they go and speak to Pharaoh. We know about the 10 plagues that are sent on Egypt. Out of that, he rescues Israel. God lets his people go. And as they go to cross the Red Sea, it splits in half. They go through the Red Sea. As the people are thirsty, God says to strike a rock with his rod. He then quenches the thirst of several million people from this rock that has water come from it. They're hungry. Bread falls from the sky called manna. They then come across these bitter waters that turn sweet because he throws a log in the water. I mean, this is a pretty amazing resume. And then when he goes up to the mountainside, God comes down with 10 commandments prescribed by him. And Moses is one of the few that actually saw the glory of God and didn't die. That's a pretty amazing story. Now, you want that guy on your team. When you're about to encounter great traversity, you want Moses on your team. And when he's about to have his most pinnacle moment, he's now going to lead the people into the promised land. Moses isn't there. And Joshua is left vulnerable. And God says, I want you to cross the Jordan. Now, when we think of the Jordan River, we think of Jesus being baptized. It's this quaint moment with John, and he's there, and the heavens split open. That wasn't the Jordan at the time of Joshua. The Jordan was actually incredibly a treacherous land. Here's a picture of modern Jordan in the floodplain time. As you can see, it's been excavated. There's a bridge. Joshua didn't have the opportunity to come and get a bridge building crew to go across it. It was actually a high tide time where the Jordan River was about a mile wide, and there was this gorge that went down about 100 feet. And there's all these trees and brush. There's no way you could cross it. It was actually a protective barrier for the city of Jericho. But what I love about the Lord is he identifies the problem. He identifies the difficulty. God is not into hiding what the actual reality is. God's not just circling around the surface. He points out the difficulty, but in the middle of identifying the difficulty, he declares Joshua's identity. He declares who Joshua is, and it's actually quite subtle. And if we don't know the backstory here, we can miss it. And honestly, as I was studying, I was surprised as I came across this. Joshua wasn't his real name. He actually had a different name. Joshua was the name he was given by Moses. We find this in Numbers chapter 13. It says this, these were the names of the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land. And Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Joshua. So Hoshea comes forward, and Moses changes his name to Joshua. Now, what's the significance there? Hoshea meant deliverance or salvation. That was the definition of the name. And Moses changes his name to Joshua. Yahweh delivers. Yahweh saves. God saves. God delivers. You can imagine Joshua coming back from that place, Hoshea. People say, hey, Hoshea. Oh, that's not my name anymore. Moses gave me a name. God's my salvation. It was an amazing name to be given. But now's the time when his name is put to the test. The task at hand is something that he cannot achieve in his own strength. And as he calls out Joshua and identifies the difficulty, he also awakens the identity that he's given him. And says, listen, I am with you, and I alone can do the work that's in front of you. Many of us have to understand the work that is in front of us cannot be done by our own strength. If what's in front of you can be done by your own strength, God's probably not in it. But if what's in front of you is bigger than you, then I guarantee that God's behind it. And as we're there and we're trusting the Lord, he says, Yahweh will save, Yahweh will deliver. Then he goes on and encourages Joshua in verse 5 and verse 9. It says, no one shall be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Verse 9, I hereby command you, be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Now we've read this verse before, to be strong and courageous. This is the command of God. But God wasn't pulling Joshua out of the game to give him a pep talk. This wasn't Little League Baseball or soccer on a Saturday. He wasn't like, come here, little Joshy. You are going to get that ball, and I want you to be strong and courageous. See, God's not into giving participation trophies. God's not in this place of like, come on, if you think you can, I want you to be the best you. I love this one. If you had fun, you won. You get a car, and you get a car. That's not how God works. See, the reason he is calling Joshua aside to be strong and courageous is not because Joshua has what it takes. It's because God is with him. there's a promise behind the command. The command to be strong and courageous comes alongside that God is with him in the journey. And this is a promise that is for us. It's not just for Joshua. This isn't some Old Testament thing. Well, that's good for Joshua that God said that. Jesus says the very same thing to us. In Matthew 28, verse 20, he says, behold, I'm with you always to the end of the age. These were his closing remarks to his disciples. That's our commission to live out. So in those moments when you think you're alone and there's no one around, remember God's with you. And that's the immovable truth that God is working in Joshua and the tribe of Israel. That we will be immovable and unshaken by what's in front of us when we know that God is with us. It's from that place that Joshua begins to lead. In verse 10. And Joshua commanded the officers of the people, pass through the midst of the camp and command the people, prepare your provisions. For within 3 days you are to pass over the Jordan to take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. As he goes throughout the tribe of Israel, he says, listen, we have to begin to prepare. We have to begin to prepare. There is no one-click promise with God. There's no Amazon Prime in heaven where you just press the button and you just get to wait and show up like the pizza delivery guy. See, the promise that they're about to inherit is a promise that's about 500 years old. Abraham is standing before God and he says, I'm going to give you this entire land. Little did Abraham know it would take his line 500 years to inherit it. As they're held in captivity by Egypt for over 400 years. And now they come to this moment that they're sitting at the brink of the Jordan. The promise needs possession. We have to understand the promises of God just don't show up like Christmas gifts that Santa Claus brings down the chimney. The promises of God need our possession. If there's promises he's giving you, we have to prepare for them and contend for them. And there's no better place to prepare than the place of prayer. And a lot of us have been given promises. When we talk about promises, we're not talking about God promised I win the lottery one day. That's not the context of promises. Promises is what's God speaking about your family, your workplace, your calling, the mission that's in front of you, a broken relationship. Those are promises. We have to begin to ask the Lord where there's an area you need a miracle. That's an area where God wants to speak a promise. So we begin to ask him and we have to prepare. What is God asking you to do before you lead into this journey? What are these promises that he's spoken to you? A lot of us are in this place where God's promised things and we're not preparing for those promises. There's things that we need to do to get ready. Before you go on a trip, you get gas in your car and you put air in your tires. We need to do the same conditioning for our soul, for our spirit. What's the preparation that needs to take place? This marathon that Israel's about to go into, we don't just sign up for a 5K or a 10K. I've never run a day in my life. Don't worry, I'll get there one day. We think that these promises are easy, but they always need preparation. There's this guy that made this bicycle where when you turn left, it actually makes your bike turn right. And when you turn right, it makes your bike turn left. And everyone looks at the bicycle as he takes it around colleges. This is a big psychological experiment. And everybody thinks it's easy. And he gives us this test that says, I'm going to give you $200 if you can ride this bike 10 feet. And people get up there and they crash instantly. It looks easy, but no one can do it. And for a lot of us, these promises, we think, oh, it's going to be easy. I'll get there one day. There's preparation that takes place to get us to move forward and ahead. And we have to learn new things. Learning new things is hard. How many of you ever got one of those smartphones when you came back from old dial-up days? What's this thing called the internet? You know, it takes learning. It takes progress and preparation. And this is what he begins to command the people. We're going to skip ahead now to chapter 3. In chapter 2, we have the journey of the spies going to Jericho. They meet Rahab. But I want us to stay on point with the preparation of Israel before they cross the Jordan. So Joshua chapter 3, verse 1. The first thing they do is they prepare for the promise. Verse 1 says this, then Joshua rose early in the morning and they set out for a place that we will just keep going. We don't need sound bites to take place with that one. And they came to the Jordan and he and all the people of Israel, some of you are just now getting that one. I love that. And he lodged there before they passed over. And at the end of 3 days, the officers went through the camp and commanded the people, as soon as you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God being carried by the Levitical priests, then you shall set out from the place and follow it. So what is this ark? We've maybe seen Indiana Jones. We know about the ark, but it was more than just a fictitious box that a movie centered around. This ark was this golden box that they prepared, and these angels hung over the top of it. But what was important about the ark is what it symbolized. Inside of it were three very significant things. They had the 10 Commandments inside of that box. They had Aaron's rod, which performed a lot of the miracles, and they had a jar of manna, where God provided bread from heaven. But the significance of the box is it represented God's presence. And then Joshua commands them and says this in verse 5. Then Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. He begins to say that God is going to do significant things in your midst. And Joshua said to the priests, take up the Ark of the Covenant and pass on before the people. So they took the Ark of the Covenant and went before the people. Why is this significant? In order to believe for miracles to happen in front of you, you have to remember what God did behind you. You have to remember the miracles that he did in the past. And as they're bringing the ark past, they begin to remember how God's presence had moved in their life. They begin to remember the significant moments where God did miraculous things. And if you need miracles in your life, you need breakthrough in your life, let's start by remembering where God's presence was moving. You say, I have no testimonies. Well, let's just take a minute and think a little harder. Let's just at least go back to that moment you raised your hand and gave your life to Jesus. That's a miracle. And that's some salvation that took place. If you haven't done that yet, just think of the day you were born. That's a miracle. We have to remember those things. Remember the joy of our salvation. And with that, we begin to expect that God will do things. And how do you know that you're ending a season of preparation? You begin to see God's presence moving around you. You begin to see activity in relationships. And the enemy is really good at blinding our eyes to God's presence in our life. He's really good at blinding our eyes or distracting us from the motion or the movement that God is doing around us. In 2 Corinthians 4, it says that he's blinded the eyes of unbelievers. Well, he's pretty good at blinding the eyes of believers as well. And he's really good at saying, oh, no, that thing that's happening, no, that's not God. Or that thing that's happening, oh, that's not God. Or that's just circumstance and situation because you're really talented. That's why you got that promotion. We have to identify that all good things, all perfect gifts come from God. That's God's presence. And if you're seeing his presence, his activity moving, and things are happening faster, maybe it's a season where it's time to possess the promise of God. Maybe it's a season to move forward where you've been in a place of waiting. Now is the time to seize the opportunity. We begin to identify God's presence and remember the miracles of the past. And then they continue in verse 11. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is passing over before you in the Jordan. Now therefore take 12 men from the tribes of Israel, for each tribe a man. And when the soles of the feet of the priests bearing the ark of the Lord of all the earth rest upon the waters shall be cut off from flowing, and the waters coming down shall stand in one heap. So what Joshua does here is he begins to select other leaders to lead alongside of him. As the priests are about to enter the water, he picks other leaders to help him lead the tribe of Israel to pass through the Jordan. What's the significance of this? We're not called to go on our journey on our own. We have to find friends for the journey. We have to find people that will be alongside of us in our journey. Again, we will talk about this every week till Jesus comes back, that we need to be a family. We need to be a community. And it's not just wishful thinking. That's our responsibility as the body of Christ. We're not called to seize these promises or go on this journey on our own. We need people that will get our back, that will stand alongside of us. God is with us, but we need brothers and sisters to stand alongside of us. People that will get your back. I mean, how sad it is that a famous proverb, when someone falls, that no one can pick him back up. You're going to stumble along your journey. You're going to get discouraged in your journey. And you need people to be there along your side. When my wife and I first got married, we were in this tiny apartment. And what I love about tiny apartments is they have tiny kitchens. And when you love to cook, a tiny kitchen is not a good thing. So we have this tiny little kitchen, has a dishwasher there. And my wife is incredibly nimble and quick and fast. I'm much more Eeyore than she is. I'm slow and methodical. How many people have that certain way you load your dishwasher? You won't let anybody else touch your dishes? I'm that guy, right? So we're unloading the dishwasher. We just finished dinner, and the way it's positioned is very tight in our kitchen. So here's our sink, here's our dishwasher, and here's where our plates go. So I'm turned this way, and Rachel's grabbing plates. And as I step back, I catch my foot on her foot, and then I hit the dishwasher, and I begin to fall backwards. Now, here's the problem. I load the dishwasher, and for some reason, I loaded the steak knives vertically. And I'm falling backwards. And it's this out-of-body experience where I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to die. Like, I am falling backwards, and the next thing I know, my wife is over here putting away a plate. She looks over, spins back, and does this matrix move and slips her hand underneath my small of my back and spins me around to where she is in front of her. Now, my wife is not Hercules, so I love that move. And we're there, and as we stand, she looks at me, and she bursts into tears. You know, it's like this ultimate adrenaline moment. I'm like, what just happened? If she wasn't there, she didn't have my back, it'd be a very different story. Pastor Brandon had a great journey until he fell into the steak knives. It's a bad parable. Don't worry, the knives are loaded downward now from here on out. We need to have people to enter the waters with us. We need to have people that have our back in the journey that God has called us on. We have to find those friends. So what we prepare. We prepare for the promise. We follow God's presence. We find friends for the journey. And as they begin to move forward, it says that the priests entered the water, verse 15. As soon as those bearing the ark had come as far as the Jordan, the feet of the priests bearing the ark were dipped in the brink of the water. This is what I love. The miracle didn't happen until they entered the waters. The miracles don't happen until we enter the treacherous waters. And as they enter the waters, this is what's so unique. It says, now the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of the harvest. The water is highest at harvest time. See, when we think of harvest, we think of easy time, like, oh, the tomatoes are here. Let's pull them off the vine. The harvest in the eyes of God are often high tide, hard times. But that's when he calls us to harvest. And they begin to enter the water at high tide. And as they're there, the waters coming down from above stood and rose up in a very far away heap towards the city, and then flowing down towards the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, were completely cut off, and the people passed over opposite Jericho. What I love about the picture is the waters that went to the Dead Sea, the wasted land where there was no movement, were cut off. For a lot of us, we live in that framework, that perspective where we have loss after loss or waste after waste. We feel like we keep going and nothing is happening. God says he's going to cut off those Dead Sea waters. He's going to cut off those dead places as we move forward into his promises. He'll have pruning in our life. Then he'll have life re-engage with us. So as they enter that water, verse 17 is while all Israel were crossing over on dry ground, the priests who bore the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan. And here's the key portion. Until the entire nation finished crossing. See, the promises of God are not just for us. The promises that God has given you are not just for you. They had to stand in the middle of that ground until the entire nation crossed. Some of us are in that moment where we're done. I'm done. I'm done. That ark was not a light little thing to hold that entire time. As they're holding the Ark of the Covenant, they have to stand firm. And this is the word for our church. Will you stand firm as God is moving forward? Will you stand firm? Will you hold your ground and not give up? Because again, the ark is with them. It represents the presence of God. God's presence is with you and will sustain you. Don't give up. You're right in the middle of the Jordan right now. God is doing something, even though you're right in the middle of it. I guarantee those priests aren't thinking, wow, this is awesome. They're thinking, hurry up. They're thinking, let's just get this done with. We'll celebrate on the other side. But they had to wait until the miracle was finished. Right now, God is doing transformative work in your life. Depending on the season you're in, don't give up in the midst of the transformation. Don't give up. We have to remember the promise, Matthew 28, that God is with us. That's the immovable truth. Will we stand fast? Will we hold firm as God is doing that work inside of us? I'm going to invite up James to the keyboard real quick. A couple years ago, I had a really difficult time in our life. We had my very close relative, my uncle, who was like an older brother, passed away suddenly. At the same time, we were on a youth camping trip. One of the students contracted E. coli, was in the hospital, was about to die. Along with other things that were taking place, I just was overwhelmed with all that had happened, so much change. And as a result, I had what was called peripheral traumas that resulted in adrenal fatigue. And as I was trying to recover, trying to move forward in the midst of a very difficult job, being in ministry full-time and all these traumas taking place, I didn't know how to move forward. And as I was talking with a counselor and realizing the degree of my burnout, I was so tired that the only thought that would come to mind was, I got to give up. I can't do this anymore. And it was an afternoon in May, and I just had some more difficult news come our way. Some disagreements took place at work. And as I was running afternoon time, I was thanking God for the work that he did in the youth ministry. But literally my words are, God, I don't know how I can do this anymore. Thank you for what you've done. I'm ready for what's next. I'm finished. And as I'm standing at this field, about to do some sprints, I hear this audible voice say, keep going, Brandon. I literally think God spoke to me. And I am there, I'm looking up, I'm like, God spoke to me audibly, but he sounds like a middle-aged man. And I look and I'm just caught off guard, and I hear it again. It says, keep going, Brandon. And I'm like, where's this voice coming from? And I look to my right, and in the distance, there is this team of elementary school students being trained. And this coach is making them do laps, and there's one kid lagging in the back named Brandon. Keep going, Brandon! I'm like, okay, God, I get the hint. I get the hint. There's those moments where we have to keep going. And God will show up in unique ways. But let's believe that we don't need a middle-aged man to give us an audible voice before we trust that God is going to encourage us to move forward. Where are you in your journey right now for those promises? Are you in that place where right now God's just identifying the difficulty and he's doing a work in your identity? Are you in that place where you need to prepare? You need to put gas in the tank and air in the tires? Are you in that place where you're seeing movement and you need to remember miracles of the past? You need to follow God's presence. Are you finding friends in the journey? Or do you need to stand strong and hold fast until God's work is completed?